Well, thanks for joining us again. This is Bill Merrell, and I'm the host of Talking Politics in Western Pennsylvania. If you had the opportunity to see part one of our 10-part series on the Biden-Harris administration, we're taking a very critical look, but the critique that I'm giving you is not just from what would be considered right-wing news. It's from, and you'll see the captions there, CNN and a lot of these other organizations. So we'll get right into it. Once again, you'll see that I'm just literally talking about the highlighted areas, but there's some areas that are very important to me because I'm retired military. So whenever I look at this stuff, I get very upset whenever I see inaction. So let's start off once again. This part two, our military under Biden and Harris. The current status of the military through the eyes of the Americans found just 45% of Americans had a great deal of trust and confidence in the military, down 25 points since 2018. The military used to be the highest confidence organization in our government at 80 to 85%. Now it's dropped significantly. Okay, and here's going to be an interesting thing for the millennials.
7 in 10 millennials do not know this, so listen up. According to a new YouGov poll, 7 in 10 millennials say they would vote for a socialist. 1 in 3 millennials see communism as favorable, and half of millennials have an unfavorable view of capitalism. So tonight, I will show you what 7 in 10 millennials obviously do not know. The 5 reasons socialism will destroy your life. Number 1, 100 million people were killed in the 20th century by socialist and communist regimes. 100 million people. If you think socialism or communism in America would result in anything other than oppression or death, you are sorely mistaken. Number 2, in the socialist Soviet Union, people stood in line for hours for a loaf of bread and were forced to eat their own shoes rather than starve to death. In Venezuela today, people are trekking hours to the borders just for a single meager meal a day. And people are burning their money because money doesn't even buy them food to keep them alive, thanks to socialism. Number 3, in communist Cuba, you have to bring your own blanket and your own light bulb to the hospital. The surgical instruments are rusty. Medication and healthcare treatments are rationed by the government. In Venezuela, antibiotics are so scarce that a little girl in the hospital survived only because the boy in the hospital room next to hers died and his mother gave her his antibiotics. Meanwhile, in these countries, the rich elites fly to other countries to qualify for healthcare, for quality healthcare, while their own people are dying. Number 4, in Venezuela, in Cuba, and certainly in the Soviet Union, if you criticize the government, you can be shot. There are 15,000 political dissidents imprisoned in Venezuela for daring to disagree with the dictator. In Cuba, political prisoners and journalists have been shot in the back of the head. In the Soviet Union, dissidents just disappeared, and the gulags were full of innocent people. Reason number 5, socialism and communism have never worked. No matter how many times they've been tried, it has failed in the Soviet Union, East Germany, China, Venezuela, Cambodia, Cuba, Vietnam, North Korea, Ethiopia, Poland, and Romania, and it would fail here too. But not before our liberty is squashed and millions of people will be forced into poverty, starved, oppressed, and killed. Apparently, 7 in 10 millennials do not know this. Millennials in this poll also said they think President Donald Trump is the, quote, biggest threat to world peace, even more so than Putin, Xi Jinping, or Kim Jong-un. In fact, 10% of millennials in this poll said Trump is, quote, responsible for more deaths and human rights abuses than Joseph Stalin or Adolf Hitler. So for goodness sake, turn off the Young Turks or whatever garbage YouTubers you watch and read a history book and reject communism and socialism before you destroy our country and your own life. Thank you. We would all appreciate it.
That brings us to the problems that the military is having today. 72% would not fight for their country. A new poll shows that 72% of American voters would not be willing to volunteer to fight for their country if the United States faced a major conflict. However, the poll showed that 30% of Americans aged 18 to 29 would rather surrender than die fighting for the U.S. A Daily Mail poll showed that only 46% of Democrats would be willing to die fighting for the country. Big bonuses, relaxed policies, new slogans, etc. Be all that you can be. The Air Force loosening prior tattoo and drug testing policies, and the Navy rolling out a record high financial incentive up to $140,000, but that didn't do the job. Also, 74% of American adults had a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in the military in the 1980s, as I mentioned. But by 2022, that had dropped to 64%. Among youth, 16 to 21, the share with very favorable impression of the military dropped from 46% to 35% by 2022. The military issued an edict saying if you didn't get your COVID shots, you're going to be thrown out of the military. Well, they discharged more than 8,000 people. They turned around and offered all of those 8,000 people their pay during the time they were out, plus allowing them to come back in, and only 43 of them decided to do that. Okay, one of the many failures of this military is the Rock Johnson, $11 million deal to, in fact, do advertising. And according to the Army, his actions even hindered the effort. The Army declared the relationship was a negative effect whenever, as prior to their commercial, they had lost 38 enlistments. So it was a negative effect. The deeper reason for the U.S. military recruitment woes, a paltry 21% of the 18 to 34-year-olds are eligible to serve due to poor physical fitness, drug use, or other mental or physical health problems. When you stop and think about that, only 1% of the population is applying to go to the military to begin with. And out of that 1%, less than a quarter of that is actually capable of meeting the physical, mental, and drug history requirements to, in fact, join. It's a terrible time for the military, but it's even bigger problem for the United States. Joe Biden is irate over the ugly truth his naval aviator revealed about the U.S. military under his command. Biden refused to support a military pay raise for the individuals serving, but he's willing to give billions to illegals. For example, the budget for all of the military is around $900 billion a year. Last year, Biden spent $480 billion on illegals. And when you realize that all of those $900 billion is to, in fact, pay for aircraft, new ships, all the troops, we have 740 plus bases throughout the world. That pays for all of that. But he doesn't want to help them. Let's look how devastating it is. The Biden White House put out a statement saying it strongly opposes a 19.5% pay raise for the troops. According to Smart Asset, to live in Pennsylvania, you need an income of $45,661 a year. McDonald's Fry Guy in California right now makes $41,600 a year, and that's starting out. That's their base pay in McDonald's in California. Let's see what the military pay is. The military pay for 2024, a sergeant, an E3 sergeant, makes less than $30,000 a year. A tech sergeant in the Air Force makes less than $38,000 a year. They make less than the Fry Guy, and they're putting their lives on the line for us. And an officer, an 01 lieutenant, makes just under $46,000 a year, and he's in charge of people, directing them to go and fight the enemy. Military bases on high alert around Europe. A U.S. official stationed in Europe speaking to the CNN confirmed that this move indicates the military has received an active, reliable threat The official added that such a threat level has not been seen in 10 years. 7 U.S. troops hurt in raid in Iraq forces targeting Islamic State group militants that killed 15. Of course, if you ask Kamala, the military is in no war zones. So none of these people were getting injured or killed. U.S. State Department. Failings around the chaotic Afghan withdrawal. And the bottom part in the red there, the U.S. military planning for a possible non-combatant evaluation operation, NEO, has been underway with post for some time, but the department's participation in the NEO planning process was hindered by the fact that there was unclear who in the department had the lead. So they're all just sitting there spinning. They have no clue about what they were doing. For those who died, the 13 that died under these failed policies. What we know about the U.S. arms we left behind. Between 2003 and 2016, the United States government spent $18 billion on equipment and transportation for Afghan security forces. Although some of the largest pieces of equipment were kept by the Taliban, including aircraft, will be limited by their use, the logistical capabilities and things and training that they have. Other equipment, including small arms, can be fielded easily and have been throughout the Mideast. Here's the problem with that. I was an instructor at what they called BRAT training. It was base recovery after attack. We learned a bunch of lessons in Vietnam. And I'm sorry to say that this Pentagon did not pay attention to those lessons learned. During Vietnam, we supposedly learned some important lessons, which means we don't leave the base intact. We don't leave the equipment intact for the enemy. Okay, all remaining equipment will be destroyed as much as possible, prioritized. Military usefulness and security classifications. We left billions of dollars, including helicopters and everything else, right there. Just walked away. Well, we ran away because we didn't know what we were doing. The surprising part about this in Afghanistan, and one of the individuals who was there whenever the U.S. Trump was talking to the Afghani forces, they asked him to, in fact, they were talking, negotiating about closing down the U.S. military's involvement in Afghanistan. And he says that one of the most interesting things happened, that Trump turned to the person who was translating and said, I want you to tell him exactly what I'm about to say. And he looked at him and he said, okay. She looked at him, I'm sorry. And he said, tell him that if any of our troops were hurt in any way, he said, I'll kill him. Everybody was like, whoa, what do you do? He said, tell her. So she told him, and the guy got real offensive, as I would too, But the bottom line is, Trump stood up, pulled a picture, gave it to the guy. It was his house. Trump walked out of the room. For the following 18 to 20 months, not one U.S. military member was injured in any way in Afghanistan. Strength does have its benefits. Biden abandoned 90% of our Afghan allies. But that's not all. That's not even the worst part. The U.S. Embassy in Kabul, American diplomats stared at a pile of passports they had collected from Afghan allies who had assisted the war effort. The U.S. officials decided to burn those documents rather than let them fall into the Taliban hands. The result was that over 90% who were likely eligible were left behind because they had no documentation. Roughly 1,000 American citizens were left behind also. The report that they put out blamed Mr. Biden and his senior leaders for failing to understand the Taliban's threat, pursuing the final withdrawal despite warnings of being slow to ramp up assistance to Americans and Afghan allies, trying desperately to leave. And they were at fault, all three of them. Another major failure will be this next international Biden-Harris disaster. The breakdown between the U.S. and Nigeria is largely contributed to Molly Fee, the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs. This makes me mad even just thinking about it. She was condescending in tone, telling them what to do. And their leader said, "You have come here to threaten us in our country. That is unacceptable. And you have to come here to tell us with whom we can have a relationship, which is also unacceptable." That's a quote from him. The U.S. military is being forced to leave Niger and abandoning their $100 million air base, which the Russians have now taken over. Notice how the American media says nothing. What does the new draft bill mean to you? In June of this year, the House of Representatives passed H.R. 8070, the National Defense Authorization. And we'll just skip down. It has all the things about everybody between the ages of 18 and 26 who were born male will, in fact, have to sign up. The Senate version requires all women to sign up. So we'll see how far that goes. 12 conflicts to watch in 2024. And this is from the International Crisis Group. Gaza, Middle East, Sudan, Ukraine, Myanmar, Ethiopia, etc. Here's the problem with it. These conflicts have started or escalated under Biden and Harris. The interesting part about this, during the Trump, the ambassador to, well, the person who from the State Department who was in charge of the Mideast said, "It's so boring here. Nothing's going on." They can't say that now, can they? And before Trump is when Russia went in and took part of the Ukraine, and Obama did nothing. Russia threatens nuclear strike on key UK cities and bases. And this is just as of 8/20/24. U.S. military bases will be targeted according to the Russian news media. And Harris said that they're not under any threats. World War III erupts as NATO country scrambles F-16 after Russian blocks airspace. Okay, as Russian analysts just said, the U.S. is on the brink of a three-front war with Russia, China, and Iran, while we don't have the military to fight it. The Chinese balloon incident, probably remember that, hope you do. Joe Biden said, it's not a major breach. All right? And that he also believed that the Chinese leadership was not aware of the balloon. If you notice here in China, the balloon started. You can't have too many kids in China. China rules everything. Their leaders knew everything. So what this happened is they came over here on Shimia, Alaska, right over our base at Shimia. It's the last island on the Aleutian Chains. It came right through the center of Alaska. It came down here. And as Wikipedia shows, Montana is a location of multiple intercontinental ballistic missile installations as Malmstrom Air Force Base. It also kept going. And where did he get rid of it? After it crossed the entire country. Because, now remember that only 60, or was it 30% of the country is actually inhabited. Everything else is open. That he wanted to make sure that he brought these two bus-sized spy machines down in an area that's not affected. But here's some other Chinese things that nobody wants to talk about. Own farmland next to 19 U.S. military bases. And the Wall Street Journal, as you see on the side there, talks more about over 100 times military bases have tried to be breached by Chinese while we keep our borders open. The Chinese spotted off the U.S. coast in Alaska. All right. these things didn't happen because of the fact that it wasn't a problem. U.S. to suspend Gaza humanitarian aid. For 22 days, Biden and Harris cost the United States $230 million for a totally failed operation. The military told them that it shouldn't be done. He did it anyhow. But it's only your tax dollars. U.S. Navy warship production is the worst state in 25 years. The Navy needs a real plan to grow the Navy. Trump administration had Battle Force 2045, more formally known as a report to Congress on the long-range plan for the construction of naval vessels. Biden has failed to move on this plan as of August the 1st. Our adversaries do not suffer such a lack of clarity, the DoD says. The Navy faces critical shortage of merchant Marines. Now, the merchant Marines are the people who, once the battles are being formed and the troops are there, they supply all the added munitions and things like that, food and everything that's needed at the front line. They're going to reduce the fleet or not use 17 different vessels that we have available because they can't get the people to sign up to work to do this really important job. Once again, 7 U.S. personnel injured in Iraq.
It's a very delicate thing, John. When you have Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and you have Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, and out of the blue in 2021, they say there's a vast white supremacist clique in the aftermath of George Floyd that they're going to root out. And this is sort of a clinger, deplorable, irredeemable, supposed subset. And you implement DEI, which is a non-meritocratic methodology of retention, promotion, advancement in the military. And then you tell the same demographic of white males from the rural and South, lower middle class, that we're going to get you, even if you've had COVID 2 or 3 times, you're going to be out of the military if you don't vaccinate. Well, 8,500 of them, of our best, left. And then we're short 45,000 soldiers. It's never happened before. And if you look at the demographics of the enlistment, they're not Hispanics who are enlisting at the same numbers. Blacks are, gays, women, etc. They're almost entirely, the shortfalls are off on the very demographic that died at twice the numbers in the general population in Iraq and Afghanistan, where 75% roughly of all the deaths were lower class, middle class, suburban class, white males, inordinately from red states. And they only represent, white males in general, about 33% of the population, yet they died. And yet that's the very demographic that the Army went after. And now all of a sudden, with the Afghanistan humiliation and Gaza, Ukraine, the Chinese balloon, the military is in full panic. So gone are the commercials of pregnant women in flight suits and George Floyd motifs for recruitment. And suddenly it's a bunch of guys that look like they're World War II vets jumping out of helicopters or storming the beaches, and the commercial says, "Be all you can be, defend your country," and this is a direct appeal to that lost constituency that they alienated. So, John, all of these differences that we have in culture and politics and economics and their view of America, red versus blue, are starting to manifest themselves in this election year, and they're not compatible. And some of them are existential when you start to deal with a military that, as I said, Ukraine, Afghanistan humiliation, the Gaza war, China threatening Taiwan. And then you look at the military and you see that it's not really equipped to replenish its massive airlifts to Israel and Ukraine. But more importantly, it's short of the very type of soldiers who volunteer to go fight in god-awful places like Kandahar or Fallujah or Mosul. And we're not getting those soldiers. And so the question arises, what's going to happen? And we're also borrowing every 100 days, we're borrowing $1 trillion under the Biden administration. So we're very worried here about a lot of things they're going to come to an apex during this election.
Needless to say, you can see that I'm very passionate about this problem that we have in the country today. It's scary on so many different levels. All those 12 different hostilities that are taking place. Some of them involve us, like Taiwan, Chinese threatening them. The U.S. military has promised Taiwan that we would in fact protect them. If we don't have the military, if we don't have the ships available to do that, if we don't have the ammunition, since we've been giving it all to Ukraine, if we don't have that stuff, how are we going to do it? All right, that's just poor planning out of this Pentagon. And I used to be there, so I'm familiar with their poor planning. But the key here for America is that we need to be doing something better. We need to be doing a lot better on so many different fronts. These 10 programs are trying to point that out, that in fact, over the past, it's not just 3.5 years, but over the past 15 or 20 years, the United States is making a bad decision on many different fronts. I hope this opened your eyes, maybe. I hope that it brought some things to your attention. I hope you understand that heading down the same path that we are right now is not the way we should do it. It's a terrible path. But anyhow, we will be seeing you in the next program, part 3. And I think that'll open up some more eyes about what's going on in the country today. Thank you very much for coming, and we will talk to you soon.